I know you're not ready to talk about pruning yet, but on this plant, on this tree, since it's for the bark and the new bark is the prettiest
Right,
bark,
right.
if you have a mature one, how do you prune that?
I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but there's, Rick Young's a friend of mine, he's a grower, and there's certain times a year if you prune it, it has better success and it doesn't have as much dieback. That plant's a little susceptible to dieback if you prune it the wrong time.
Now, is this the same thing as coral bark?
Same thing. Sangu kaku is the Japanese name for it. The genus and species is Acer palmatum. The common name is coral bark, and the Japanese name is Sangu kaku. So you could call it Acer palmatum, Sangu kaku, and then the common name would be coral bark, and that's how it would be listed. It's about 20, 25 feet. The older it gets, the older bark doesn't hold its color as well. It is the new bark. The plant can be a little bit problematic if it's not pruned properly. Sierra yew is a wonderful upright dissectum leaf, but it has an upright form, so it's going to be a taller one. So like we talked about earlier about having like a burgundy lace, this is a green one that's going to get a little bit bigger than burgundy lace, but it's another one that's a medium-sized grower. It's not going to get quite as big, and it's green. So what's cool about it is putting a weeping red one down in front of it. This is the fall color. This is the spring color. This is the new growth. It's just a cool plant. I mean, it's almost prehistoric looking. And the translation in the Japanese is blue dragon, for the hues of blue. And now, Shishigashira, we talked earlier about, this is lion's head, and what it actually means is female lion. And there is a male cultivar, and it's not as good. This is the best one. And its form, it's stocky, it's short, it's interesting. And we don't have a good picture of it, but it's even interesting in the fall, and it has good fall color. But it is a cool plant, and most collectors will have one of those just because it's got some interesting merit, and it's a real stalky, kind of stiff kind of plant. And but it is a neat plant, especially when it gets up in about a 4 to 5 inch caliber, about 12 to 13 feet. When it starts getting pretty mature. Does anybody here know anything about Chinese pistache or golden rain tree? You know, some trees don't look like much until they get to 4 or 5 inch. You know, they have to get to a certain size, and then they kind of come into their own. And you were asking earlier about specimen. Specimens, sometimes it takes them a while to get that look. I mean, like Nuttall oak, for instance, looks good when it's a younger tree. We can grow Nuttall oaks at our farm. I can grow 1,000 of them, and 900 of them will look the same, and they'll, at 2 inch, I can go down through there and just lollipop pick them. You can just pick every other one, leave the other ones for spacing. You do Shumard oak that way, you grow 1,000 of them, you might have 300, you can sell the rest of them, you just got to take a chainsaw to them because they look like the devil. And it's just a difference in how they grow. They're both an oak tree, they're both a red oak, but Nuttall oak just does better. So therefore, a lot of people don't grow the Shumard as much because it's not as consistent. And so that's what a lot of producers or grower wants. They want something that's consistent, the same thing, they can sell the same thing. You know, you order 2 before you order concrete block, it doesn't matter if you order it from Lowe's or Home Depot, you're going to know kind of what you're getting. And that's what a lot of the growers are going for. And so when you get that inconsistency, unless it's somebody that wants one that's twisted or turned or multi-trunked or forked, or they don't want that. And so that's the eye of the beholder, but some of that's a specimen. That's what they like. I used to have some guys that would come to our farm and tag trees, and I wouldn't even tag for them because what they tagged, I wouldn't have sent it to them. But they wanted something gnarly and twisted and different, and I said, I love it, take them. You know what I mean? Because most of the guys I'd send them to, they wouldn't want it. They'd say, I'm not paying for that. So I'd love it when those guys would come. And a lot of it was architects or designers. And so the deal is, it's just like I said to a lady earlier at the show earlier, she said something. I said, well, you could have plastic pink flamingos in your front yard. If you like that, that's great, do it. But everybody wants a little something different. So that's the deal. Some people want a single trunk tree limbed up, and some people want a 3-cane multi-trunk. Some people want one that's had the top busted out of it, you know, because it's gnarly and different looking. And I'll show you some gnarly and different here in a minute. There's Tamiyukiyama. That is a wonderful, wonderful plant. Its stems are interesting, it's tough, it's a dissectum, it's a great plant. I mean, I could talk on about 200 maples, we don't stock them because they don't sell well. So what we've tried to do is pick ones that do well here, sell well, are readily available, and that's what we tend to kind of stick with.
Is that top one looks like it's almost upright, but the lower one looks like it's weak.
And I'll show you how to do that, and I'll show you some pictures. Did y'all see the pictures that were running earlier with Kevin Grisham and I in the fields in Oregon? Did y'all see those pictures? Some growers grow them where they're flat and spreading out, and the Crimson Queen, if you noticed earlier, was more spreading and mounding than it was upright. And some growers grow them taller, and it's because they can do that. And I'm going to show you how you can make this weeper. I trimmed this one back earlier. I'm going to show you how you can make that one do that. If you want one that's you want to see out your bedroom window or your kitchen window and you don't want it to get tall, I can show you how to do that. You want to get one taller and block something, or you want to leg it up a little and plant something under it, I can show you how you can do that. It's just the difference in the grower. And most of the time it's because their customer base, whether it be in New York, Ohio, somewhere else, that's what they're asking for. And that's just like we had the World Trade Center contact us about trees for that World Center when they were redoing the landscape. They wanted 400 or 500 7-inch willow oaks, limbed to 7 feet, all matching. I just laughed at the guy. I said, and they wanted them in boxes, 7 foot square, 3 feet deep, and they wanted them. I mean, and I'm going, you should have started on this a couple of years ago, buddy. I mean, nobody grows those trees that big and those specifications hoping you're going to buy them. They don't do it. I said, they get bulldozer blight. He goes, well, what's that? I said, you take a bulldozer and push them out. Because I said, the limit of people wanting a 7-inch tree is very, very small. And most of the time, it's like Bemis comes and plants you a big one with a tree spade. The market for that is 1%. And so nobody grows that. So it's not practical. It's not commercially viable to do that. So most of what we sell at our farm are 2 to 5 inch. We can dig them with a spade, put them on a truck. I can put 120 2-inch trees with a machine dug ball on an 18-wheeler and be legal. And that is the most popular. And that's a minimum size Little Rock for a commercial tree. And so most landscapers, it's 2, 2.5, 2.5 to 3, 3, 3.5, 4 to 4.5, and a few 5-inch. And so what we do is we try to grow trees. If we plant a block of 600, we'll try to go down, dig every other tree when they're 2-inch, leave half the group left to be 3-inch, dig half of that one, and you're spacing them, but you're selling them. Then when you get down to 4 and 5-inch, when you get down to where you've picked the best ones out, the bulldozer goes there and pushes them out, and you start over. And that's the same thing. A buddy of mine told me last week, because I've got some maples coming from me, well, Scotty, if you don't take these, they're getting pushed out. I said, Tom Doman, I said, Tom, are you he said, they're too big, nobody wants them now. So I said, well, send me a few more. And so he sent us, I've got a bunch of these in the field, but he had some big ones, and I need a few more big ones. And they get to 3-inch and nobody wants to buy them. Shipping's too expensive, they're too hard to handle, and so the value goes down. So there's a market. Trompenberg is a really good leaf. That leaf is deeply divided and it cups, and it's unique. And see how this young growth is doing? It's almost like it's emerging, waiting for the sun to come, and it's going to open up, but it doesn't open up. It's a really cool plant. It doesn't get quite as big as bloodgood. I haven't seen any quite as big as bloodgood, but it is a really cool plant, and it's almost, pure maroon or ox blood. I mean, in some cases, it's almost black. It's so dark. It's a really good cultivar. Here's Viridis. That's a really good weeping one. It's a very good dissectum in a weeping form. It has a mounding habit, but we can make them taller.
Do you think that's the same as waterfall?
It's really close. Waterfall typically, if you planted this one and waterfall next to each other, waterfall is going to mound a little bit more and spread a little bit more. I think waterfall probably get bigger, and we've got both. But people come in.
The leaves are identical. I mean,
They're almost exactly the same, and that's the difference. I mean, it's just, there's minute differences in them, and it's a good one. The waterfall's a good one. And somebody walking by looking at it, they look the same. There's little differences, and sometimes it's the leaf, sometimes it's the habit, could be the fall color, and that's the problem with sometimes the differences are so minute you can't justify having them because they're not viable to stock. Here's waterfall. Hey. A lot of it's got to do with how the grower grows it. If you want it spreading, you nip the tops out and you make it spread. If you want it upright, You nip the sides and you stake it, and I'll show y'all how to do that in a minute. Here, when to plant. I mean, I as a grower, been in the business a long time, family's been in a long time, fall is by far the best time to plant most things. As a re-wholesaler and grower of container material, we sell plants 12 months out of the year. August and January are probably the two worst months, being the coldest and the hottest. Do we sell them in? Yes. Do most of them live? Do 99% of them live? Yes. Do they have a little more care it takes? Yes. But fall is typically the best time to plant, but we do sell year round. And then we've gone to this, and this has helped a lot because we're not having to cut the roots. And we're taking even shade trees and hollies and all kinds of stuff and going to this because the plant, when the landscaper gets it, it doesn't shock back. Now the rule of thumb is when you take a bald and burlap tree, say you called us up and you wanted a B&B tree, bald and burlap. The first year you plant it, it's going to sleep. The second year you plant it, it's going to creep. The third year you plant it, it's going to leap. It's going to creep, sleep, creep, and leap. And what that means is it takes about 3 years for that root system to get reestablished. So I'm not trying to point this at anybody. It takes about 3 years for that thing to reestablish its root system and take off. When you do like this, you're cutting out about half or more. And actually it can even be better because what you've got now, instead of those roots having to put out new feeder roots and do the fibrous root system, it's air pruned, completely air pruned. You pull that off, it is a mass of roots. You take it, put it in the ground, it'll take off like a rocket. Sometimes in 1 year, after 1 year, it's amazing how fast it'll grow. The technology for plants has come a long way. The bottom of that, the sides are woven. The bottom this is a woven or knitted on the sides. This bottom is solid. So what happens on the bottom when it's sitting out here on the ground is those little bitty roots go through that and lock to the ground, helps hold moisture, and it keeps it from blowing over. But when that root hits the side of this, because of air, it goes this way. And so you don't get the circling and it gets a better root system. So you pull that off after it's been in that sack for a year or two out here. The tree's getting bigger. It's not girdling like it would in a container, a plastic container, and we have a better plant. It's getting bigger. I can go up on the price when it grows. You have a better plant. When you plant it, the landscaper has a better plant, and it's just better for everybody. And that's Alan Phantom designed that, came up with that, and it's a great, we're really using a lot of those. It's really helping a lot. But typically it's when we start getting into like 2-inch material and bigger stuff that we do that. Sun exposure and wind, I mean, it's the same thing. The Japanese maples may look great till July or August. They get too much sun, the wind's blowing on them. The first sign of stress is the tip starting to burn. You'll see the tips curl, tip burn on them, leaf scorch. After that, if it's too much sun, you'll start seeing sun scald on the side of the trunk on the west side. It'll start busting the bark. It's because it's getting too hot. It's not designed for that. It can't take it. So that's, how to plant. It's as much as where you're planting it. Size of the hole, we've talked about that, and there's the perk test on the water. You need to plant them high if you have a sprinkler system. If you don't have a sprinkler system, you still need to see, because let's just say you don't have a sprinkler system, you think, well, we're out here digging, it's dry, I got to water in the summer. What about when it rains and we get 20 inches of rain in 3 months and it's rain, 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 rain? That plant's going to drown in the wintertime. That plant needs water in the winter and it needs to have air in the winter. And so you don't do anything to it, and you plant it in a spot, and you plant it, say now, and it's dry, you think everything's okay. What's it like when it's wet? You could lose the plant in the winter and you thought it was a good location. It's not. So that's why that perk test is important. Or you plant it high and you add water if you have a sprinkler system. Most people, the sprinkler system's over water. Most people over water. Problem with that is plants stay shallow, roots don't go deep. What I try to do at my garden is I try to water 2 to 3 times a week till I see runoff. When I see runoff, I stop. That's based on how much rain we've had and how dry and how much the trees are sucking up. The big thing is if you've got big trees. In my back garden, I've got white oaks that are this big around. And so I've got some Japanese maples planted there, and they suffer from being around those big oaks because those big oaks takes up thousands of gallons of water a day. Thousands. University of Georgia did a research on a 24-inch oak tree, and in 24 hours, I think it was 4,200 gallons of water that tree used in a 24-hour period, is how much water it was sucking out of the ground. And so when you get these big, huge trees and you're planting stuff under them and around them, it takes extra water for that. But you have to be careful not to overwater that stuff too. You don't want to just plant straight compost. You want to mix it with, other things. You want it to be well drained. If you plant in straight peat moss, when it gets wet, it's too wet. If you plant in straight soil, it's going to be too wet and dries out. It's like clay. When it dries out, it's hard as a rock. It's like a towel. A damp towel will suck up water better than a dry one. Well, it takes, when a plant out here in a pot, or y'all probably done it, if you have a plant in a pot on your deck and it gets really dry, you can't just go out there and water it once and it's wet. It's got to suck that up and hold it because it's running out around the edges, it's running down the bottom. It's got to be damp to hold the water. Now, we have a synthetic-based wetting agent called acrylamide polymer that you can add to your pots that'll help reduce watering by up to 400%. It's like what's in diapers, and you mix that with your soil. And that's a good thing to put in your pots. You just don't want to overuse it. And it's good in cornbread because it makes it go a long way. But too much in your pot's not good. Whether it's in the ground or not, it has to drain well. If it's in a pot, it has to drain well. You don't want it to get dry. You don't want it to be too wet. And again, moist is moist. And I can't tell somebody because that's all dependent on too many factors that I got no control over. So I just tell people that. Some people get frustrated with me. How much? I can't tell you. Mulching is important. 2 to 3 inches is kind of standard. 4 inches maybe a little overkill because you don't want to pull mulch up around the tree. The thing you want to watch out for is when you're mulching is use a mulch that is porous. Use like shredded hardwood, shredded pine, something, because if you take compost and try to mulch with it, it's going to promote seed growth. It's not going to let the plant breathe. You want to actually plant the soil and the things you're supposed to and then mulch with something that's going to deter things from coming up under it and competing for moisture. And then you're going to want to keep it where the plant can breathe because oxygen is just as important as water.
How far out do you mulch around?
I personally like to go out to the drip line. You can't always do that, but I mean, if you've got a right, because most plants will go out. Their root systems are going to go out to the drip line, sometimes further, but the drip line of a tree. So if you've got a 24-inch oak in diameter or caliper, and it's got a 40-foot spread, it's going to have roots going out 40, 50 feet. Now, ideally, you'd want to mulch that whole area, but if it's out in your lawn, you can't do that. So, but most roots go out to the drip line. So that's ideally the best thing to do because all your new roots are going to be out here. You're not going to have as many up in this area. To stake it or not to stake it. If it's an upright plant, whether it be a Japanese maple or not, and you've got a windy area or it's pretty tall and the ball could break, I think staking is important. There is some research now saying that it is it can be a problem, it can't be a problem, but I mean they used to tell you not to eat bacon and eggs, and now they're telling you butter is good for you, and so it's 2 glasses of wine's okay, 3 will kill you. I mean so some of that what you got to decide on is the location I've got it in suitable? Is it going to be okay? The weepers don't tend to get pushed around as bad. If it's an upright plant like a 2-inch tree, let's don't even talk about Japanese maples, any kind of tree. If it gets a lot of wind whipping around and it's a ball and burlap, then it breaks the roots loose and it starts getting loose in that ball, most of the time you're going to have a problem with it. It's going to probably die. And if it's container grown, the roots are intact. But if the roots just keep whipping all the time, even if it's a 30-gallon pot like that, it can't ever get the roots established. So sometimes staking them is great. Sometimes it's not very sightly. But now they do make stakes where you can do 1 stake or 2 stakes, and a lot of the big commercial sites are 3, or they have a duckbill that goes down the ground. But I mean, typically I would tell people that it's probably better to stake trees that are taller that are going to catch wind than not to stake them. I don't know if y'all have noticed out here on Interstate 430, the new ramp they've built going to the Bass Pro Shop. They planted 70 lacebark elms out there, Elmus parvifolia lacebark, that are a little taller than they should be. They didn't get them from me. So, but my point is, they didn't stake any of them. Now they may come back and stake them because they're putting Christmas lights on them right now. but they're going to have some problems with those trees because they didn't stake them. And if we get some bad 70-mile-an-hour winds, and we can get that sometimes, that'll be hard on those trees. And when you go take a bald and burlap tree and it blows halfway over and you're out there pushing on that thing trying to stand it up, it is hard on them. And so I've been there, done that. Care after planting. What have we talked about? I've been trying to hammer that home. It's really, really the big thing. Pests in Arkansas. We don't have a lot of pests for Japanese maples. Now you do have aphids, you do have whiteflies, but you can spray, if you're having a little infestation, you can spray that with most of the things you use on anything else. Most of the things that kill Japanese maple are mechanical, a weed eater, lawnmower, too much water, not enough water. I would say less than 1% is a disease and or an insect. I mean, if it's let me say this, if it's planted properly and planted in the right place. Now you put one in the wrong place and you're stressing it, you're overwatering it, you're not watering it enough, or you're putting too much sun on it, it's going to stress it. When something gets stressed, bugs will come to it and it'll create other problems.
What about pet urine?
That's bad. That ammonia, that's bad.
I didn't think it was good.
It's not. I mean, and the problem is once they start it, it builds up and it builds up and it builds up. It's like salt. Too much fertilizer build up salt. I mean, and it can create a problem over a long period of time, and it's best to avoid that. Again, we like pets because they help us sell plants. It's like the weed eater blight. Sun scald, tip burn, mechanical damage, and for vitricillum wilt, that is a problem. The last one there you see is pretty much, it's a goner. If it gets that, you can't do much about it. The problem, the diagnosis of that particular problem is it can look like tip burn or sun scald or mechanical damage, and it's hard to diagnose it. If the plant's put in the proper place and you don't have these issues come up, you can diagnose it and sometimes you can stop it. But it's tough to do anything with. And it may be on something we already gave you. I had a fella come in to me yesterday. I think it was yesterday. He came over. I was in the shop doing something. April brought him down there. He said he's got this Jap maple. It's got a problem with it. And I started asking him questions. He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah. And I said, did you do this? He goes, yeah. And he goes, my brother, he's a horticulturalist in Dallas. And he said, you know a lot. He said he knows a lot too. So I said, well, do you have any pictures? No. I said, well, is the tree alive? No. I said, what'd you do with it? He said, well, I cut it down with a chainsaw and threw it away. And I said, well, there's nothing I can do now to help. I mean, I said, and he said, well, I want to plant another tree back there. And I said, and I asked him about the sun, I asked him all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, if it's that problem, you don't want to plant it back there because it's in the ground. And I said, I don't, and now that you've hauled the tree off and you've ground the stump out, I said, I don't know. I said, I don't know if they can even tell it with a soil test. But I said, we probably could have diagnosed it. He said I said, how long has it been planted? Oh, about 10 years. And I said, how big was it? He told me, and he said the bark started coming off and it started dying. I said, he said, yeah. And he said, well, that sounds like it. And I kept talking. He said, yeah, it sounds like it. And I said, well, it probably was. I said, I would probably not plant one back in that spot. I'd probably go with something else. Because I said, I don't know what it was, and there's no way we can tell you. And his brother's a horticulturalist, works for, I don't know, one of the parks in Dallas, and he and I went through the same, diagnosing what the problem was, and I don't know why his brother told him to I don't know if his brother told him, but he cut the tree down, ground the stump out, and then we don't know. So point being is there's probably been 4 or 5 people in the last 5-10 years that have thought that could have been what the problem was. It's pretty rare. Hardiness zones, the most cold hardy varieties typically are 4. The average is 5. The biggest majority of them are 5 to 8. Some are 9. So the biggest extreme spread on it would be 4 to 9. The average is 5 to 8. Now what's good about that for us is you can put them in a pot, put them on your deck, and if you insulate them, they're going to be okay. If you put them in a pot, in a raised planter, figure them about 2 zones colder than what they really are. So,
You got double wall there?
right, double wall. If you don't have a double wall, it's going to be pretty tough on them. I'm not saying that. What happens is, say you plant that tree in a single wall ceramic pot, and you've got that much soil out there. Well, in about 3 or 4 years, those roots are all going to be out the edge of that pot. They're going to circle around that pot because they got nowhere to go. So when you get an extreme cold snap, all those roots are going to freeze on that outside. You put that on the deck, you get 110-degree day in August. That pot is so hot you can't touch it. It is cooking and burning those roots. Okay? The beauty is you can move that back out of the way for the sun. If you forget about it and it's out on your deck and it's that cold and it's dry, it's even worse because it doesn't have any moisture around the roots. So the insulation and that soil moisture we talked about will help keep it moist, but you've got to pay attention to those. The beauty about putting these plants in pots is, you can move them around. The beauty of it too is, it gets too big for that pot, plant it in your yard, put it in a bigger pot. I mean, and it's really unique that you can do so many different plants in a pot that have so many of those characteristics on your deck or patio or like I said, we did some jobs down at like Stevens building out on their patios on the east side where they didn't get any afternoon sun, but the wind up there is horrific on those buildings when you're on the 30th floor and all that kind of stuff. It's just the wind, even when it's not in direct sun, the wind whipping around dries the leaves out, and it's hard on it. That's why earlier I think it mentioned wind. I know quite a bit about this stuff, and so sometimes I get ahead of myself, and if y'all have got questions, just ask me as we're going. So if you've got a specific.
When you insulate the pot, does that still mean you need to adjust by 2 zones or not?
It'll help it. It's good. That's just a good, probably it'll cut it down by 1.
Okay.
It'll just really help your plant. The biggest thing is you don't want to leave it in there till it busts the pot and it gets too big. See that tree is about 1.25 inch caliper. It's in a 7-gallon container. You could put it in here when it gets up to about a 2.5 inch caliper, which is going to be about the size of a Coke can. It really needs to get moved to a different pot. Or you need to pull it out of there, trim the roots on the outside of it, and put it back in kind of like a bonsai. Because what's happening is you're getting too much root mass on the outside of it, and you're restricting what it's going to be able to do. But what you're doing is you're putting a lot of root on the outside because the plant's tendency is to send the roots out to that drip line.
So if you've got a pretty good sized Japanese maple that's growing in a ceramic pot, I have one on my deck, all right? If I pull it out, are those roots gonna be wrapped? And if they're wrapped, if I try to put it in a bigger pot, should I cut those roots back?
Cut them off.
Oh, okay, so it's just even like with,
What I would do in your case, pull that out. You need to do it now. Don't wait. I would probably wait till it cools off till it warms back up next week. Water it well. Make sure and then wait a day. Have your other pot ready. Pull it out of that pot. When you pull it out of that pot, you're gonna have just a mass of roots on the outside. Take a sharp tool. What works really well is a machete. Okay, a little hatchet.
yeah,
A little hatchet, and make it sharp, because you don't want to fray all that stuff and make it look like it's rope that's coming undone. You want them to be clean cuts because you want that to start back over. If you get a pair of pruners, that's great, but your pruners aren't going to like that dirt. Okay? So what I like the guys to do is take a sharp machete or a hatchet that's sharp, and you're just going to trim those roots back to where they're all coming like this, all the way around it. The other thing you might want to do is cut some off the bottom. So you can lay it over on the side and cut the bottom. And then you're going to repot it and then mix some good soil and try to mix something back kind of like what you already had to begin with, because you don't want something totally different, and basically start over again. Now, bonsai situation, you would take and wash all the dirt off and feather the roots out, and you'd trim them back, and that's a whole different deal. Since you hadn't been doing that, it'd be tough. So you just want to trim them back. You probably will have to go an inch, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. How long has it been in? How big a caliper is it? How big around is it?
maybe 2 inches.
2 inches, about like a Coke can. So it's
Oh, no, not that, probably half that.
right.
Yeah.
And how big a pot is it? Oh, you probably ought to bump it up, but it's probably not too big. But the problem is, pots, they will split, crack, especially terracotta, even expensive terracotta. and then you get air coming in there, and then air burns those roots. And so if you can, when you pot one back up, if you've got your own pot, insulate it, make sure it drains well, and you'll have a lot better, and it'll stay in there longer. But make sure you use that fabric so that the roots don't circle as bad. Now they will still circle some, but when they hit that, that'll stop them. Plus then you can pull that whole thing out like that. It's a lot easier and a lot better. Fertilization, I learned the hard way. Who remembers when we had that freeze here Easter morning about 6 or 7 years ago? Raise your hand if you remember it. Did it cost any of y'all $250,000? I remember it well. We don't fertilize a lot of this stuff now till the last week in April. We had an early spring, we got fertilizer out, stuff had new growth on it, sap was up, it killed. I mean, I've still got maples here now that are big, that it's still damaged them, and we're hoping that we can do something with them if I have to plant them at my house. But it was horrific. And so what I tell people now is wait till the last week of April, first week in May, even if the thing's leafing out, then fertilize it, because you don't want the sap to be up and bust the bark on it. Now here, I'm gonna pass this little fertilizer. This is a slow release fertilizer. Use it, fertilize once in the spring. Don't do like your garden and do it every 4 to 6 weeks and fertilize late in the summer and the sap's up and we get a November like we just had and it busts the bark in them. So you want them to harden off and get ready for the sap to be going down. If you fertilize late in the season, you will create a problem. And it's not just with Japanese maples. You're going to have a problem with crepe myrtles and lots of plants. So don't keep feeding stuff late into the season. Taper that back off. I mean, that's the good Lord's way of summer hitting and stuff slowing down and not growing. And so you don't want to try to push that. You want to take advantage of what that plant's used to doing. So wait till it starts leafing or the last week in April. I mean, we've dug trees at our farm still dormant in May. We've had springs that late, but I've dug trees up there. Now, willow oak, water oak, a lot of your red oaks do well when they're starting to barely leaf out and dig them. They transplant better then. But typically, we're through by the middle of April, but it's run to the middle of May. But what I'm getting at is we want to wait to fertilize until after we know we're not going to probably get another frost. That freeze was it was tough. Not just for me, but lots of people in the nursery industry and lots of people in other industries. It was tough. So do a fertilizer that's going to last 3 to 5 months, 3 to 4 months, like an Osmocote, an IBDU, this Nelson's. It has 2 or 3 different types of nitrogen in it, and you'll be a lot happier. And it may not give it exactly everything it needs, but you're better off it getting 75% of what it needs than you giving it more than it needs and then you losing the tree.
Well,
And
Scott, I've never fertilized. I don't fertilize anything. I mulch. I know
hold your hand out.
you gonna slap me?
Get a pH test. I mean, you may just have a great soil and everything's working great, but it's like at the tree farm. What we do, we have drip irrigation. My theory at the farm, if we can't afford to irrigate it, we can't afford to plant it. We put lime out every year with an airplane. We put fertigation, which is irrigation fluids, or liquid fertilizer in the lines when we irrigate to fertilize, and then we still apply fertilizer on top of the ground, tons of it. But we're trying to get the best tree in the shortest amount of time so we can get it to market. And so we want to make sure our pH is, like I said, 5.5 to 6.5, and we want to make sure that we're giving it everything it needs, and we stop irrigating late summer. The only time we'll start irrigating again is in the fall. If it's dry, we'll irrigate so we can dig, so we've got enough moisture in the ground to dig. A good time to prune is last month and right now. I don't know if you noticed, but I trimmed on this little tree earlier and the sap was rolling out of it. I was showing people how to cut and where to cut. This has been in the greenhouse with plastic on it, so it's a little bit ahead of what would be out in your garden or yard. And so my point is, if you're going to trim them, now's the time to do it. And then anything that's rubbing or girdling or crossing each other, you want to trim that back. I'm going to show you in just a minute about cutting above the collar and how to tighten these things up so that you get the tightness that you want. I've got, at my farm, I've done lots and lots and lots of pruning. I've got electric pruners that a battery pack you wear, and it's electric. Because if you take these and do 3,000 or 4,000 trees in a day, your fingers, you can't move your hands, you're walking around like, and you got blisters and blood coming out of your fingers. And so what I've did is I bought those electric pruners, sold to Hispanic guys. I used to go up there and prune because I like to do that on crepe myrtles and certain trees because I just like to do it. But it got to the point where I can't do it. But my point being is there's a time to do it, and there's a size to cut, and there's a size not to cut. If you want to prune something, it's better to cut it when it's smaller so it can heal over in one season, and you want to make sure you don't cut it too close to the collar on the plant. And I'll show you what that means. Does anybody know what the collar is on the tree? And I'll show you that in a minute, and it makes a big difference so that the tree heals up the fastest and you don't create a problem for the tree. Weed eater blight, we talked about that earlier. That's a real problem, even for big trees. I mean, once one gets to be 2 feet across or something, typically it's not that big a deal. But if you're doing it yourself or your lawn maintenance guys are doing it, keep them off your stuff with weed eaters. Keep them off of it with mowers. Soil compaction's a real problem. Aeration, trees need air. Soil compaction is detrimental. Weed eaters are detrimental. That's mechanical problems. I mean, those things are, and I'm not just talking about with Japanese maples, I'm talking about with everything. Commercial sites are typically the worst. Here is a perfect example of a wonderful garden with lots of texture, lots of color. This waterfall maple, Tamiyukiyama, Shishigashira, Bloodgood. There's a couple others in there. It's kind of hard. That may be Achilles gold. It's hard for me to tell. Here's rhododendron. They're all worked in a garden and different textures, different colors. They're going to have lots of interest when they're dormant. They're going to have lots of interest in the fall, and they've got lots of texture. This one in the front's a dwarf variegated, but you can do lots. There's lots of different cultivars. There's lots of things you can do if you plant them in the right place, if they get the right amount of sun. Again, they do best if they get 55 to 60, 65% sun. What I try to tell people is from like 1 to 2 o'clock or 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the rest of the afternoon, they do not need to get full sun. Now that doesn't mean if you've got a 24-inch oak tree sitting over there that's it's getting afternoon sun, but it's getting 50% sun because the tree's blocking off, that's okay. It just doesn't need that late afternoon sun that when you walk up to your house and put your hand on the brick, it's hot. It doesn't need that. So if it's getting filtered light, the other thing is if you've got too much shade, you can limb your trees up, which we recommend lots of tree services. Limb them up 10 or 15 feet if they're really big trees. Limb them up. Get some more light in there. And then also you can go in there and selectively prune out some trees, or you can take some trees out that are not desirable. And if you've got little trees growing in with big trees and the tops are bad, or they're competing with another tree, take that tree out. If it's a non-desirable tree, and I mean a non-desirable tree could be something that's not supposed to be there, but I mean sweet gum, hickory, I'm not saying they're not desirable. My point is a tomato plant in a rose garden's a weed. So if you've got trees though that are never going to make a good tree, the top's messed up, ice damage, it's forked, it's crotched, it's damaged, take that tree out and give the other trees the moisture and the nutrients and the light and the room to grow. Take that plant out. I don't know how many people's homes I go to and I say, this needs to go, this needs to go, this needs to go. It's never going to do anything. It's all it is a problem. The other thing is when it gets bigger and it does collapse or you have to take it out, it's going to cost you more money. It's the same thing when I go to people's homes and they have a landscape and they're building a new house and they say, well, I want to save that tree. Well, don't build your house here. I mean, because you're wasting your money to try to save it because you're not going to save it. It will die. In 5 years, that tree will be dead. You can take it out now for hundreds of dollars. It costs you thousands to take it out later. And if you're not going to stay away from it, stay away from the drip line, do not try to save it because you are going to lose. I promise you, you are going to lose. And so people don't want to hear that, but that's the hard facts. There you go.
Oh my God.
That's like the one I sold the doctor. What's that? Does it make you weak? Makes me tear up. Anyway, the point I'm making is that's what you want them to be when they get big. So that tree's 70 years old, maybe 80. But what?
Most of us are starting way too late.
Well, that was my point about telling you earlier. You're not going to have to worry about. You're not going to have to worry about most of them. But you can get them trained and you can plant them in the right spot. I mean, but isn't that something?
Scott, I have one in a pot that I've had for years, and it's really bad to send out a root out of the hole and into the ground. And one actually committed suicide a couple of years ago because we couldn't move the pot, and the root was so bad. But this one, I can follow the root 3 or 4 feet away. Can I cut that?
How big's the
off?
tree in the pot?
It's not very big. It's a small little full moon maple. It stayed small.
Sure. What you just same thing. You just need to pull it out, trim those roots back, replant it, and it's just looking for more nutrients and more water. It's starving for attention, and so you just pull it out of there. That's pretty common. We had the same problem before we started using these. Had the same problem in a 30-gallon or 45 or 50-gallon plastic pots, roots coming out, attaching to the ground, looking for somewhere to go. This is the best thing that we've been able to do.
I can just cut that off with the bases. I'm trying to pull it out.
Exactly.
Because I can't get it out.
Well, just take you a sharpshooter shovel and just go all the way around that pot and lean it over. If it's coming out the bottom, just cut it off and then pull that thing out of the pot, trim those roots off just like we're talking about. If you've got a big one hanging out, you can use a loper. It's not any different than like they're going to be digging sweet gums yesterday or today at the farm, and sweet gums got a big taproot. And white oak, Corcus alba, like big white oaks like Goran, they got a big taproot. Pines do the same thing. We go to dig those with a spade, sometimes that root's coming right out of the bottom. When you dig it, that whole root, it may be sticking out that far out of the bottom. The guys take a sharp shovel and cut that off, or they take a pair of lopers and cut that off. But now all those roots are going out, and you're cutting them off, whereas you've got a bunch of them that are going to circle. And so you want to trim all those back, just like if we were digging that ball and put it in a bigger pot. But you want to use a sharp tool to do that. You don't want a frayed edge because that root will die right there. And then it's struggling to put out more lateral roots, and it can be a real problem. Alternatives for sunny locations, the Kelly's Gold Maple, which we sold out, don't have any more, but we got more coming. It's a really neat plant. It's not a Japanese maple. It's a really neat plant. Paperbark maple, Acer gricium, is a really neat plant. There's some right out here. It's called paperbark maple. It takes the sun. It's got real interesting bark. It's exfoliating bark like a river birch. It's cinnamon colored. It's got a really neat looking seed on it, and it's got a really neat leaf, and it's got good fall color, but it'll take the sun. So what you can do with that kind of stuff is you can plant one of those when it gets bigger. You don't want to get one this tall and then plant a Japanese maple next to it that tall and it's getting western exposure. What you can do is take one, plant it, and then on the east side you can plant a weeping maple where it gets some shade, where that tree's giving it some protection. And if you look out there, that big Kelly's Gold has got a bloodgood on the east side, it's got a weeping maple on the east side, and then on the south side it's got a weeper. But then I've tried to plant stuff around here to kind of shade things, but then when we started adding more stuff and more plants and everything, it kind of, the plan went awry. Yes, ma'am.
How tall do those get and how quickly do they grow?
Which one?
The two that grow in the sunny location.
The Kelly's Gold Maple is going to get about 25 to 30 feet. I've got 3 planted at my house, and they're probably, man, they've been planted there 10 years. I think it's 10 years. This one out here has probably been planted 15 or 20. The ones at my house, though, have gotten, even though this one's here, they may be 25 feet tall. I can't remember exactly how big that goes. Hey, Kate.
Yes, sir.
The Kelly's Gold, what's the ultimate height on? Is it 30, 35 on the Kelly?
I will find out in just a second.
I think it's 30, 35 and about 20 wide.
My sister's building a home here, moving from out of state. She's got a hard set on the maple, but it's a new development, so it's total sun. So, but she's 75. She said, I want something that I don't have to live to be 120 to, see it. So if you were going to pick one of those two.
The Acer gricium's really slow growing. Acer gricium's hard to propagate.
So
It's not a Japanese maple, but it's a tougher one to get up to size. It's a tougher one to make it look like some of the ones we have. It's a really unique looking plant, but it's a specific garden. It's a specimen, smaller garden plant, whereas the Kelly's Gold is like what I used it for, to block a 3-story brick wall with no windows in it that I wanted as a backdrop, and then in front of it I planted a weeping red and did some pottery. I should have some pictures of that. I don't, I'm sorry.
So that when you get somewhere in about how.
They're going to be small, but there's some other plants if she's wanting a maple that'll take full sun, like a rubrums, you know, October Glory, Red Sunset. That particular plant just got that fluorescent yellow color. But now it will get a little bit of tip burn late in the summer. Well, it's not really burn, but that color fades. That color's in the spring. I mean, it looks like these plants behind you.
And it's called what?
Kelly's Gold. Is that?
No, did you mention another one as well, or?
Well, for a shade tree, I mean, you could do October Glory, Autumn.
Don't have any shade at all.
Oh, is this going to be a shady?
No, it's a brand new development, so there's.
No, what I'm saying, it is a shade tree. It'll take full sun.
Okay, and it's,
Like Red Sunset, October Glory. Those are going to be maples that you put out in the lawn that are going to get big and give you some shade and have good fall color.
okay.
20 foot, sir.
20. Well, see, now that information's not good because we've got them over 20 feet. So, but the point being is, no, but what I'm getting at is that a lot of times it's a 50-year-old plant and there's Japanese maples and they say blood gets 25 feet and there's 35 footers in England, they're 150 years old. So, but the point is it's kind of, well, I'm not talking about that particular plant. What I'm talking about in general, a lot of plants get bigger. And does anybody here know Little Jim Magnolia? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's supposed to be a dwarf plant, okay? Dwarf plant means it's smaller than the parent plant. The parent plant is Magnolia grandiflora, which is the big magnolias that get 100 feet tall in a couple hundred years that are native to southern United States. Okay, Little Jim is a dwarf, and it is because it doesn't get as big as a parent plant. I've seen them at Disneyland in Florida, or Disney World in Florida, 35 feet tall. You go look them up in a book, they say they're 20, 25 feet tall. Guess what? I've seen them 35 feet. I've seen blue Atlantic cedars 100 feet. I've seen Japanese maples that are 80 years old that are blood goods planted in Selma, Alabama by Tom Dodd that are 25 to 35 feet tall, and they say they won't get that big. So the Kelly's Gold, this one out here I bet you is over 20, and the ones at my house are over 20. So I'm going to say 25 to 30 because the ones at my house are 10 years old. That one out there is probably 15 or 16 years old, and they're already, 20 foot plus.
But like Kelly's Gold, could you put it in container?
No, it's not a container. It's going to be one put out in the landscape. It's a backdrop plant to block the sun so you can plant something as a companion plant in front of it on the east side. That's what I'm talking about.
See, I've got a deck that has western exposure. I mean, well, that's where I get all this sun in the afternoon.
Right.
Which I have 2 Japanese maples, but every year, of course, I get the leaf burn on them and everything. So I'm thinking that's just not really the right place for them.
Right. Well, you could transplant them and move them now, or you can try to plant something big enough to give them some shade if you can get something. We don't have anything that big. But ma'am, talking about your sister, we can give you some alternatives and talk to you about some different plants. If it's full sun, though, you got lots of options with full sun. The shade companions like the Styrax. There's a Marley's Weeping Pink that's a really neat looking plant. There's a Styrax japonica. It's an upright. There's also a weeping one called, not the weeping one, but I'll think of it here in a second. Pink chime, and what happens on that plant is the standard one blooms white. The pink chime has a pink bloom. The bloom hangs upside down. And Marley's Pink is a weeping form with a pink bloom that hangs upside down. It's kind of interesting. The wolf's eye, dogwood, there's a blood good maple at my farm that's a big one. That's, you can't tell how big it is because nobody's standing beside it. But when you call up and say, hey, go get me a picture of a blood good, and it doesn't look good because it's in the wintertime. They just took the picture. But the point being is that's some that were growing, and I don't know if you can tell, but see how there's the shade, you can see the sun's coming across and it's shaded. Well, there's woods right next to them almost. Here's some paper bark maple grown in these containers. These are here on site. This is us using this same container. I want to show y'all that. Here is the Kelly's Gold. That's a really nice looking plant. Now, we sold them all. We had some today or yesterday, and we sold them all. We got more coming. That was one I was importing with Japanese maples, and it's done real well. I like it. It's a little brittle. If we get some ice damage, it can be a little tough on it, but it's tough on birch and yopon hollies and wax myrtles, and I mean, the ice is pretty hard on everything if you're driving. Here you're talking about your fungal problems. I wanted to mention it because it's probably the worst thing they can get, but it's very rare. I don't know that you need to get excited about it. There's not much you can do about it. If you catch it early, you can stop it. Big thing about when you trim stuff like that, if you think there's a problem, you want to wash your pruners after each cut in alcohol or Clorox and water so you don't spread the disease. So if you've got a plant that's infected and you're trimming a bad limb and you cut it back past, has anybody seen that movie Zombie Wars? Or War Zombie, or the Brad Pitt movie where it's a zombie movie? World War Z, that's it, I'm sorry. Anyway, they get bitten and they turn into a zombie, but if they get bitten like on the hand, they cut their hand off before the thing spreads. It's the same thing with this problem. If you get the disease and you cut back to good wood, you can stop it if you catch it in time. And so the deal is, the tree won't be a zombie. So, but you got to catch it, and you don't want to cut an affected area and then trim something else, because that disease won't just hurt your Japanese maples, it'll hurt your other plants too. Some of them are susceptible to that problem. So the point being is, if you've got your tree in the right place and you're getting the right moisture, and it's not the hot summer and the leaves start to curl and tip and you're starting to see a little bit of mixed color and you're starting to see some problems, this could be what it is, and you'll start seeing some dieback. And so if that's the case, you may want to trim it, but if you do, every time you make a cut, clean those pruners. You don't have to scrub them, just either have a spray bottle or a little solution, or you can dip them in your hand pruners like these and just dip them in something and then trim it. And you can stop a lot of that, and you can keep that from being a problem. And if you don't, once it gets into the main trunk of the tree, if it comes from a limb, but it's a xylem, phylum, cambium problem, and it's a water transfer issue, and so sometimes you can stop it. Hey, Kevin, can y'all put that back on, showing some of those maples in the field while I show them how to trim this? Here's a twig that we were working on earlier. These maples all have a Y. This is a little branch coming out. So if you take that, if you want to cut this thing back, say, who was it tell me theirs is too big and you want to cut it back? Okay. Be a test on this later. So,
Probably in my backyard.
so what you want to do is you want to trim that back, come in here about 1/4 of an inch. I don't have my glasses on, and cut that back like that. So that's going to die. These will be new branches. So when they come on out a little bit later in the spring, when that comes on out in May and starts leafing out and it's real tender, you can just go up there then if you want to nip that back and just pinch it off with your thumbnail. And so right now we've got that nip back. So it's the same thing right here. You see these two little lateral branches? Come in here and cut that off like that. That's not quite 1/4 of an inch, but my point is, this one died, looks like, let me put my glasses on, that'll help me. I'll pass this around, but like here's a piece that died, and there's one starting right there, and there's one coming out right there. That's a natural dieback. Now, something you can do to make your trees look better is you go in there and just trim the dead wood out on your trees. Now, the other thing you've got on these is a collar, and the collar is the main branch or the trunk and the limb coming off, and you've got a collar and you can feel it, and you want to make sure you cut out past that collar about 1/4 of an inch like that, so that
Away from the bark.
away from the trunk. You see these guys trimming trees and it looks like they're making siding and they come right down next to the tree. They're doing you and that tree a disservice, and they do not know what they're doing, and they don't care, because if they did, they'd go to school and learn a little something about horticulture, or at least the proper techniques on trimming trees. It just makes me cringe every time I go by. Same thing on these guys that take crepe myrtles and murder them. I want to stop and cane them. I'm going to pass this around so you can see the limb, and then, but here is the collar. You don't want to get into the trunk, you want to cut it out here. But you want to cut anything that's rubbing against each other, and you want to make sure that, like that one, see, if you came down here and cut it more, you'd be getting into the cambium right here. So that particular limb got cut off up there, which that's that limb that came off of there. Now here what we've got is a dissectum maple, and we trimmed it back, and if you see these were trimmed, now that's going to branch right there and fork. And so when those come out, when it starts to branch again, because this is all new growth, all that right there is last year's new growth. So if you don't want that getting long like that, when that branches and comes out and you want to make that do it again, just nip it off with the pruners or take your thumbnail when it's tender, and you can do that. But if you want to make this thing taller, what you want to do is find out this particular limb, stake that and have that come up, and use this tape just like this. And I've got pictures that I'll show you here in a second, the guys using it in the field. And you can make that just keep coming on up. And that new growth sometimes can be 12 to 24 inches long. And you just keep bringing that up. So say you bring it up this season, you bring that up this season, and you want to make that branch, and you just nip that off right there. And now you're going to have a branch coming here and a branch coming here. Now if you look at that limb going around, there's a terminal bud coming off on both sides of that. So you cut it back just a little bit above that, and it's going to fork and branch. And then when it starts growing again, you can just nip that stuff off. If you wait till that stuff is bigger than an inch, sometimes it takes more than a year for it to heal up. And the old thing about using paint and spray and all that, that doesn't work, because what happens is it causes that to rot. If you'll cut it off and it's less than an inch, typically it'll heal up in a year, and it'll callus over, and you won't have any kind of problems with it. But you can make that straighten just like that, and you can keep this a little more narrow and make it taller. And I'll show you, here's some pictures, we'll talk about them as they go.
Some limbs that are larger than an inch that need to be.
You need to cut them back like we're talking about with a collar. You might want to use a really good pruning saw so that if you've got lopers, you're not, what happens if you take a pair of lopers and you have a cut, this is a bypass cut. When you cut little stuff like that, it's okay. You take a big limb and you go to applying pressure on this side, you're crushing that bark on this other side. So you're still doing some damage to that limb. So with a saw, you can cut all the way through it and hold on to it, or cut the bottom so that you get a good clean cut and you're not damaging that wood on the bottom applying that pressure trying to cut through it. When it's young and tender stuff like that, it's okay. If it's the size of your finger or something, you'll be okay. But when you start cutting limbs, you know, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and you got a pair of lopers out there and it's like, yeah, you're using the wrong tool. Now, it depends on the tree, depends on the application. I mean, but a pruning saw is the best thing to use at that point to get the best result with the plant. Here's a row of where's my little cardboard funnel? That is orange flame in the field at Scott Mallory's. Here's Scott Mallory again. He's grinning because I placed an order with him. He's a real funny guy, like his first name. Anyway, see how full and thick those are? They prune those things heavily, and all that shoot, that's new growth. All that's new growth, okay? Now he'll cut that stuff back and use that for budwood, and he'll bud and graft those, and he'll grow more trees. Now there's one like we've got in stock out here that's a big one, and that's a vigorous grower, but all that 2 and 3 feet of growth is new growth. But now he's given that thing everything it can take, and those are grown out in Boring, Oregon, and that's at his farm. And he's the one that came up with that plant. And there's some with some fall color, and there's some weeping maples in front. And you see how they've got those staked? And what they're going to do is they're going to keep staking that on up. They're just going to keep coming right on up with that, just like I was showing you over here. And if they want it low, they don't do that. And if they want it 5 feet, 6 feet, and I'll show you some pictures here in a second that are 6, 7 feet tall, weepers. So you can make them. Now that is a 1 gallon orange flame. You see how straight it is and tall it is? I mean, that tree is probably 3 to 4 feet tall if it was planted. And it may be taller than that. But the point is, that's a nice straight tree that's well branched, uniform. That's a nice little liner to growing off. Now there's a maple from China. When I was over in China, that's one that was in a container that they were getting ready to plant, a big dissectum. I would stop these pictures if I needed to, but it's better just to let it run.
I also have a weeping one, and sometimes I get limbs that just come up straight. Do I just cut those off? They don't
wanna go over anymore.
Right, you can do that. These are just some pots I took. We had pots made in China. This is me over there inspecting some before they got ready to ship them. I was cutting some of their stuff off and checking them because they're sending them to us. You don't want to pay them before they ship them unless they're right. That guy's Me Have No Money is his Chinese name. That pot is ones we have out here. They name that the Scott pot because that's basically an Italian rolled rim pot that we had done in a blue glaze over there that we've got out here. And there's a green one, and they name those after me because that's not typically what they make. But we were sending those to Kevin to get his approval. But there's some more plant pictures here in just a second.
So talk about trimming the coral bark for color, a mature one.
Hey, Palmer. Here. Let me hang on a second. There they are loading pots to go down to get on a ship, and they're loose loading them in containers, but they're loading them on a truck, rolling them up that ramp, and taking them down and putting them in a container to get shipped over here. And then the boards in the truck is bamboo, and we had to stop that. We had so much breakage. There's the way they guy them over there, and they trim all those limbs out that tree. They cut all this stuff out of this thing to make it survive, and they wrap them, and you couldn't believe the size balls they put on there, extra small. But they had thousands and thousands of acres of landscaping, and the landscaping they do down the interstates over there is like what you see at the malls here. I mean, it's major landscaping. And it's because labor's a quarter an hour, and they've got farms, and they're using that stuff in the cities, and they're landscaping the interstates, and they need fresh air, so they're planting trees. That's just a huge bonsai that's in the hotel we were staying in. There's some Japanese maples coming up there. Now this is a green dissectum see how tall it is? And that was trained up tall. Now they tie these up like that so they can dig that ball. Those are upright palmetums, but a red one, probably Bloodgood or Emperor One. But they have to do that so they can dig them. But that's how tall that is, and they've trained that tree to get that tall because a lot of folks want them tall, a lot of them want them short and squatty. And there they are, some small ones. That's the size that go to the field to be grown off to be the big ones. And so that was probably Tamiyukiyamas in 3-gallon containers or 2-gallon containers with drip irrigation on them, spaced out in a greenhouse. There's Kevin. Now he's right at 6 feet, and that plant's a little taller than he is, and that's one he just got through tagging, and that's an upright. I mean, it's a dissectum. It's got the really lacy leaf, but it's also a tall one, and so it's the same. This is a short one that they've crotched and made spread out. There's a big blue Atlantic cedar named Bubba, and we had that one dug and shipped down here and sold that. That's a big one. Can't get many of those on a truck. But there's a couple more pictures coming up here. Here I am tagging blood goods in the field and selecting the ones I want. Going down through there looking at the characteristics of them and picking out some stuff with some good form. But that's how close together they're growing them. Now notice there's no ball holes, so these haven't been dug. So they've got a sprayer. I've got one too. You go down through the field and it sprays that. Now that is wild raspberries growing up in a field. That's a huge blood good. That's really, you don't typically want one forking like that. But we had a farm out there that the guy was going to push everything out with a bulldozer and made us a deal on getting some big maples. That tree was probably 15, 16 feet tall and probably 5-inch caliper. And there's Kevin with a weeper. You can see there used to be a ball hole right here, and in Preston they dug it. They left this one. That's a big dissectum. It's clear trunked all the way up to here, which must be around 5 feet before the head starts opening up. So my point is, you can do a lot of different things with them, but you have to work with them when they're little. It's like a kid or a dog or a horse, and train them. And right, Palmer? And blue Atlantic cedar, the only reason that's in there is to show the contrast in colors. You can use that's a blue spruce, but you can use a blue Atlantic, which back here I think is a blue Atlantic, but it's showing the color contrast between doing those two colors with a field. Those are blood goods. Now we sell a lot of that size, like 10 to 12 foot blue Atlantics. And that's a cool plant to do, like a weeping red maple out in front of it. And this is deodar cedars, small deodar cedars, and they're staked too to keep the central leader going straight on. See those stakes? These are already big enough. Now there's some maples that are you know, 5 to 6 feet tall in the field. And I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them out there. This is all around Portland, Gresham, Troutsdale, Boring. That's the Coosa Wolfside dogwood. And oh, I'm sorry. That foliage, see the new foliage is pink? So it's got some pink and variegated and green in it. And what's cool about that plant is it takes the sun a little better than regular Cornus Florida, which is eastern dogwood or dogwoods that we grow around here in the woods. And there's a bloodgood that's like 8 to 9 feet because Rick's 6'4", showing off how he's pruned that and how thick it is. And they like to prune them and thicken them up. So that one's thick because they cut them back hard.
So you do that, any of those, anytime you've got a V like that, you can cut that
Right.
out and that will thicken it.
Right, now here's Acer Grissom paperbark maple showing some bark and stuff. That's one in the field showing the caliper. But I mean, pruning is not going to hurt one as long as you prune it properly and you don't spread any kind of disease. And that's what I was trying to show you on how thick and full some of them are.
If mine aren't, then I need to do that.
But those guys are selling them, and so they want them thick and full. And you know, and there we are at Monrovia, and Kevin and I went to Monrovia, and that's a 5-gallon weeper that we had come, and we were picking them out and looking at them, showing them kind of what we wanted.